Welcome to Planted, finding your roots in STEM careers. Journey with us as we navigate the winding path into plant-related careers with professionals who have taken root or are still branching out. I'm Meghan Wiesbrock.
And I'm Jessica Turner-Skoff.
The future is both really exciting, but can also be a little bit scary. At a very early age, you get asked about what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And that can be super daunting to figure out and a little bit overwhelming at times.
But that's why we are here. Over the course of this podcast, we're going to be taking you on this journey where we will be introducing you to some very cool plant professionals. We have a professional that travels to remote areas of the Amazon to do research. We have a professional that works with people all over the world to make sure that no tree species goes extinct. We even talked to a young professional who's still trying to figure out their journey, but they're taking some really cool internships to help figure out their path. And we also talked to an ethnopharmacologist, but I'm going to let you figure out that one a little bit later. Before we start this whole journey, though, it's really important that you kind of get a sense of who we are. So let's introduce ourselves. So Meghan, I understand that you are the link between Boy Scouts, manatees, and hula dancing. Those three things seem very dissimilar, so I'd love to hear how they connect.
Sure. So I'll start with the one that correlates to when I was youngest. So when I was in kindergarten, as part of our end of kindergarten ceremony where, everybody has to, graduate from kindergarten, I had said and drew an illustration of me hula dancing because I wanted to be a hula dancer, which is utterly ridiculous because I've never been to Hawaii and I don't even think I know how to hula dance, but I don't know, 5-year-old me thought it was a really great career option. I also at one point wanted to be a marine biologist. I have family who lives in Florida. We got to travel there when I was younger and fell in love with manatees. And so I adopted a manatee, wanted to save the manatees, and had a passion for marine biology at a young age. Also read a book about sharks, and that kind of fed into that passion. But eventually kind of found my love for science and education and the merriment of those two, and worked as a camp counselor at a Boy Scout camp in New Mexico. And so
fun.
Yes, I had to join the Boy Scouts of America as part of my employment there. And so that is how those three things that you probably would never put in a sentence together are related to me. And I understand that you also have a link to between three interesting things. So can you tell me a little bit about how white pine tea, zoos, and scientific research, how those three things are linked together?
Absolutely. So yes, I am the link between those things. And I would say that they kind of go in order there. So let's start with the white pine tea. One of the most pivotal moments of my childhood, I was always outdoors. I loved being outside, playing, getting in the mud, all of that. But one of the most pivotal moments was when my mom took me outside and showed me that you could take white pine needles and boil them in water and make white pine tea. Now, I don't recommend this for everybody. Do your research on your medications and all of that before you go out and start eating things from the wild. But that was a moment that the tea tasted like Christmas. And then Mom was telling me that, people used to drink it for the vitamin C to, ward off scurvy. And it was just this amazing connection that this plant that was in my teacup was something that was so much more. And that was the moment that plant blindness kind of evaporated for me. Now, the idea of plant blindness is that you just don't notice the plants that are around you. And I know that it's a real thing, and people don't realize that it's so much more than just oxygen. The woods are a pharmacy. They are our clothing. They are our shelter. They're really the foundation of keeping the world the way that we like it. And so that was a moment for me that really sparked this deeper appreciation for the world around me. And it made it so much greener and brighter. So, I always had this love of plants, but as a kid, I was always drawn to animals. I still am. I love animals. But it was one of those things that I thought I wanted to work at a zoo. So I actually worked at a couple zoos, and it was some really cool, great experiences. I got to, hand raise baby flamingos. I got to play with a 2-week-old baby rhino, which they're like big puppy dogs. They even roll over so you can rub their belly. So highly recommend that if you get that opportunity. And that was through internships that I got to do those. But it was one of those things that as I got older, I really started thinking more about trying to understand how science worked, and I wanted to get into scientific research. Plants are a great thing to study. They don't move. They stay put. They're less likely to hurt you. There's a lot of reasons and advantages to studying plants besides just being awesome. So I went and got my doctorate at West Virginia University in biology, where I studied the most interesting plant in the world, American ginseng, but you'll have to hear about that more in a later episode. But it was there, that I was able to do really cool scientific research, everything from traveling around Appalachia, looking at American ginseng in all these different states and populations, to doing, research in the tundra, looking at these plants that are so old, but so small. It's just really been an incredible opportunities available through plants. Plants have provided me the life that I have, and it's so cool.
Jessica, I love listening to how your three things that are linked together also connect how important plants are to everyday life and how we can use them for medicine. We can use them for all sorts of things within our lives that maybe not everybody notices if they are still, plant blind and they don't necessarily notice the plants around them. But once you start to see them, you see them everywhere. And I know that that's true with me, that once I started to identify trees and know more about them, I started seeing them everywhere I went, in places that, you wouldn't, it's not necessarily a forest. You're seeing them in urban landscapes, in suburban landscapes, just everywhere you go because you're just so much more aware.
You'll never watch movies or TV shows the same way, too. I know that I'm constantly whispering to my husband while we watch movies going, well, that doesn't make sense. That tree doesn't grow where they say they are. I'm a lot of fun at parties. But yeah, it definitely changes how you perceive the world. And now, Meghan, you have a very cool job because you get to make everybody excited about trees and plants through it. Can you talk a little bit about what you do and how you got there?
Sure. So I am the manager of curriculum and instruction at the Morton Arboretum. I get to manage our school scout camp and teacher programs on site, which means I get to work with a lot of different people who are coming on site for a short field trip or a workshop, a day-long workshop, or even a week-long of camp. And then also develop resources for people to bring trees inside and teach about trees and learn more about trees through some of our programs and then some of the resources we provide.
And what type of education do you need for that?
So my background isn't teaching, isn't more formal education. I was a 7th and 8th grade teacher for 6 years before being at the Arboretum. I taught 7th and 8th grade science, and I got to follow my students for 2 years. So I started with them in 7th grade, moved up with them for 8th grade, and then back down to 7th grade. And absolutely loved that. I have a bachelor's degree in middle school education with concentrations in science and English from the University of Dayton. Go Flyers. And then because I'm in education and in general a lifelong learner, when I was teaching, I wanted to go back and get my master's. And a lot of colleagues of mine were getting masters in administration or in technology, or the use of technology in teaching. And I really wanted to do something because I was still so passionate about science. I'm such a huge science nerd that I found this really cool and unique master's program through Benedictine. It's a master's in science, content, and process. And I got to take classes at Fermilab and Brookfield Zoo and the forest reserves. So I got to kind of see.
That's so cool.
Yeah, education in a lot of different types of settings and the resources that cultural institutions can provide to teachers. And so that kind of opened my eyes to this whole nother side of education in which teachers can use to bring into their classroom. And that's kind of where my path took a turn into more non-formal education.
And we should do a plug for our bonus content for our teachers out there.
Yes, lots of extra ways that you can utilize this podcast in your classroom to bring some of those STEM professionals and the really cool things that they're doing in the field into your teaching. Jessica, I understand that you also have a pretty cool job and a very cool title. So can you tell me a little bit about your role as a treeologist and what that looks like?
Absolutely. I have what I consider the best job in the world. It's perfect. I get to talk about science all day. I get to learn about science all the time. And like you said, the lifelong learning, that really resonates with me. So the Morton Arboretum has amazing science and conservation work that they're doing. And I get to learn about it, and then I get to translate it and package it up for the different audiences that I'm working with. So, I'll work with, Meghan here in education programs. I'll work with special events. I'll work for development. I'll work in all these different departments, finding ways to get our science and research and conservation accessible and interesting for the people that are hearing it. It combines a lot of my favorite things, talking and learning, so you can't really go wrong.
And what is it? I know you've talked a little bit about this already, about your educational background, but can you share that more in detail?
Sure. So I got my undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Science from Muskingum University in southeastern Ohio. Go Muskies. During that time there, I also did a study abroad. Wasn't really abroad. It was in Hawaii, but I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I took marine biology for a semester, and I realized it was a lot of fun, but it was not for me. I like being on land. Then I went and got my master's at University of Maryland, College Park. It was a really cool program in conservation biology and sustainable development where it was really applied. I got to learn how nonprofits run. I got to learn on how to work with different non-governmental organizations and government organizations. It was this really comprehensive applied experience. During my time there, I realized I really wanted to understand the scientific process. Hands-on, I wanted to be in the mix. So I went on to get my doctorate in biology from West Virginia University. So all in, I graduated from the 23rd grade, and it is a long road. I would not recommend for everybody, but it has been something that has been really phenomenal, and the experiences that I've gotten have been just, something for my memoirs someday. Now, speaking of, the path that we all take, Meghan, I know that a lot has changed from the time that you thought you would be a hula dancer to being the manager of curriculum and instruction at the Morton Arboretum. So can you tell us a little bit about the points along that journey that, we haven't been able to take a look at?
Yeah. So although I know it's a pretty big jump, there has been, one thing that has always remained constant, and that is that I absolutely love science. So I don't really know how the hula dancing fits in there. It probably doesn't at all. But when I was really younger and wanted to be a marine biologist, it was because I loved learning about science, and I loved learning about endangered species and what could we do to save them. And so knowing I always had this interest in science, it was always a place that I saw myself working. And early on, that was as a biologist, and I took a lot of biology and science classes in high school. My electives were like anatomy and honors biology, which are, maybe not the same electives as a lot of my peers were taking at that time. And eventually, although I had a really strong love of science, I also really liked working with people and wanted an opportunity to work more in presenting information and talking about it than doing research. I'm fortunate that my mom has both a background in horticulture as well as a background in counseling. And she has always said, if you love what you do, then it's not work. But she also was able to give me some tools and opportunities to do some, aptitude and interest testing. So I kind of knew where my interests lie, but also where my skills were, which eventually brought me into education. So that's kind of a quick version of the long journey.
From hula dancer to manager of curriculum instruction. I love it.
So, Jessica, I understand also that from just listening to your experience and kind of how it has evolved from wanting to work in the zoo to, then falling in love with plants, or maybe just re-falling in love with plants. Can you talk a little bit about some of your career experiences and what you learned along the way?
Absolutely. So I think one of the important things for me is that it's not just, following your heart with a career. And it's following your heart, but also having your head very much along for the ride. So with me, I've always loved biology. I've always been interested in it. And it's been one of my skill sets, is being able to understand how the world works. And so, I think as far as picking a career, it's important to kind of find that beautiful marriage between what you're good at and what makes you happy. And so, it's kind of hard to know what makes you happy unless you try it. So I remember, I constantly, when I was younger, was trying out different professions or opportunities, everything from volunteering in a vet's office to, like I said, studying marine biology in Hawaii to, working at a zoo to just basically any opportunity that kind of came available. And I said, oh, I think that might be something I'd like to do or try. I did it. And it's one of those things, too, that you never really know what will benefit you in the long run. When I was getting my undergraduate degree, I spent a lot of time in theater and radio and communications, and just because I really enjoyed it and I thought it was fun. So it was just something else that I did in my spare time that ended up helping me now in my current career. So just taking advantage of all those different opportunities, figuring out what you like, figuring out what you don't like, and eventually you're going to get to a place that works for you. It's not just this linear path. It's kind of like, when you see those images of like ballroom dancing where you put your feet. You have a direction. You'll know that you'll end up where you need to be. It's just going to look a little scattered until you get to your end destination. So, but just try things out and find something that complements your strengths and your interests. What about you?
Very similar in that I think a lot of the things that opportunities that I took where I followed both my heart, but also my head really closely, and looking at opportunities to do the things that I, didn't know I was going to like, but wanted to try, which eventually led me to take more opportunities like that because I found a place where I loved what I was doing and I was good at it. And that, I think, was a very good merriment of finding my interests and my skills and where they aligned, because eventually I kept taking opportunities like that. I knew I liked working with kids. I knew I liked talking about science. And so I took an opportunity to be a counselor at summer science camp at the Morton Arboretum. And so you don't realize it until you kind of look back that these opportunities that you take on a whim because they are something that you're interested in, if you keep down that path of following the things that you like and that you're good at and follow your head and the heart at the same time, you end up exactly where you're supposed to be.
It's one of those great things, too, that no matter what, building skill sets can only help you, and it could also provide some really cool stories for parties. So something to keep in mind. And about a year ago, Meghan Wiesbrock gave me a call and said, how would you feel about doing a podcast? Here we are now after much work and preparation much later, but I kind of want Meghan to talk a little bit about why a podcast.
So one of the reasons why I thought this would be a fun project, a fun collaboration between both of our areas is that we constantly have teachers or students who want to have access to some of the science content and some of the current work that's going on from our science professionals and want to know what that job looks like. I thought this would be a unique opportunity to provide that in a different type of medium, on an on-the-go type of format that people could grab and go or find parts of the journey maybe where they currently are and take and run with it. And because there's a lot of advice, I think, that has come out of all the conversations that we've had with a number of these different plant science professionals, but really find a way to reach that next generation of people who are thinking about this field and provide them with the, context of what it could look like, as well as really great opportunities that they may not know are right in their backyard, or things that internships they should consider. So kind of just some ways to give more access for people who want to know more about this field or are having a hard time in their own path and want to figure out maybe what they should do next. Jessica, what would you say is the best case scenario for this podcast, or what are you hoping that listeners get out of listening to, all of the episodes, or even a sampling of a few?
I think it's a great opportunity to highlight some jobs that might be somebody's dream job that they didn't even know existed until this podcast. I mean, an ethnopharmacologist? Come on. So it's one of those, it's a great opportunity that I hope our listeners will be able to listen to these episodes and possibly see themselves in little snippets of the journey. It's okay that a career is a journey. It's okay that it's not linear. If you follow your head, you follow your heart, you play to your strengths, and you do things that interest you, you're going to end up okay. And I know that that's something that I would have really enjoyed hearing when I was younger, that I was on the right trajectory. And so that's the best case scenario, is that we'll be able to give that snapshot to our listeners and provide them with this foundation for exploring their worlds.
Well, I do have one question that I think both of us have to answer, because we've made all of our guests answer and all of our guests choose one, which is hard to do.
That's hard.
What is your favorite plant?
Well, today, my favorite plant, I'm going to have to go with a tree just because I am a treeologist. But my favorite plant is the tulip tree. Now, not only is this a tree that just reminds me so much of my parents' place in Ohio, they're these really tall, beautiful trees with this really just regal vibe to them. And they have these incredible flowers that fit in the palm of your hand. And sometimes, when you're in the forest, they're so tall that you don't get to see the flowers until some actually fall on the ground. And they're big and they're like yellow and orange, just gorgeous. They're also a great host plant for tiger swallowtails, which if you like butterflies, stay tuned for a future episode. And they're also a great indicator for American ginseng, the most interesting plant in the world. So tulip trees are just poetry, not to be super cliche, but they're just beautiful. And what about you, Meghan?
Well, along that vein, I also have a favorite tree of today, I'll say. It's also a beautiful tree because it has a beautiful flower, and this very different than the tulip tree, though, and that is the eastern redbud. It's one of the first trees that when I came to the Arboretum, I started to notice everywhere, and it has this very striking look to it when it flowers, because the flowers emerge right along the branches, and so the branches themselves will look pinky and purpley when there's a large stand of them, because they do usually kind of grow sometimes on the edge of woodlands, and so they look really stunning in the spring. But then when the leaves emerge, they're heart-shaped leaves. They have these really cool red buds that hang from the tree after it's making its seeds. It also has a warm place in my heart. It is one of the first trees we planted at our home in Geneva, and we planted it on my first Mother's Day. So it has a heart-shaped leaf and a special place in my heart, not to be totally corny and cliche, but...
That's okay. We both cornered that on this one. We promise that we keep the cliche to a minimum, I'd say, throughout the rest of the series.
We'll let you be the judge.
We'll let you be the judge of that. We're just really excited for you, listener, to be on this journey, to hear from some of these incredible professionals in the plant-related field. And hopefully you'll be able to walk away from this with a deeper appreciation for plants and a greater understanding of where you're going in your career. This episode of Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers, was made possible by the Morton Arboretum and Multimedia Services at College of DuPage. Check out additional resources and bonus content at www.mortonarb.org/plantedpodcast. This is Jessica Turner-Skoff
and Meghan Wiesbrock.
And we hope you'll continue to join us as we journey into STEM careers.